Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Peripheral. A great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, let's start off with Tommy's situation. He can't let this go. Obviously, last episode, he pretty much figured out, alright, Sheriff was it Jackson or Jackman? Is the sheriff is involved in all of this. So he went to Gladys and it's like, okay, tell me like the evidence that was like tagged in. It's like, it was a gun and a doodad, and she's like, a doodad. He's like, yeah. And she's like, is anything close to a thingamabob? It's like, because I get it. He got hit. And the fact is you think he's a little crazy. I guess it's like, right, despite what technology is nowadays in this show, in 2032, even where technology is, it's still like, so unbelievable to think, like, we're nowhere close to cloaking technology for someone to have access to it and have stolen your prisoner. It's like, I don't know, man. Like, I'd kind of give him the benefit of the doubt, but once again, the thing is, hey, you got sideswiped, the fact that your head's not on, like, straight, so I don't know. But it's like, yeah, she's not believing Tommy, but yeah, it's like, yeah, the evidence, the only thing that was, like, collected as evidence was your cruiser. So it's like, all right, he goes investigate. He finds not only the gun that Bob used, but also the sonic, I'll call it the sonic punch thing, as Tommy puts it. Yeah. The doodad, which is the name of the episode. So he gets called by the sheriff, which I was like, oh, this has got to be about Mary, because Bob did break out. But then I also, like, it wasn't until Tommy showed up at the crime scene, I was like, oh yeah, Mary's like super dead, isn't she? I was like, yeah, because why would Bob leave her alive? It's like, yeah, because there's always, yeah, I was like, I should have figured as much. I mean, he could have left her alive, but he wasn't going to. So I pretty much figured as much. I was like, yeah, she's super dead, and that's what that's all about. Corbell's upset, and the sheriff is like, well, he's trying to spin the story saying Burton and them have kind of dipped their toes in, like, the drug game, and now someone's hired a hitman, but, like, Tommy's like, that's complete and utter BS. He's like, all right. And he kind of calls Tommy out. It's like, you've been, for these past 10 years, you've always known who you work for. You want to turn your blind eye, make yourself seem like you're some grand hero, acting like you didn't know what was what. Yes, you worked for me, meaning you worked for Corbell Pickett. So it's like, you've always known who's really run this town. You've always known what things are, but you're such a naive child. You want to live in this fairy tale, like everything, you've turned a blind eye to so much. Maybe it's just his naivete, like, kind of blinded him, or maybe it's just he refused to see what was always there in front of him, the ugliness of this world, that, it's like, right, you thought you were doing good, you were always in Corbell's pocket, because you worked for me putting you in Corbell's pocket. So it's like, right, you can try and arrest me and Corbell, but the fact of the matter is we're such large pillars of this community. He's hired 50-60% of this town. You think they're going to look at him as the villain that he is? And even the people who know who he is are not going, I mean, for one, so many people are tied to him, so like no one's going to turn their back on him, but also people who remember and know who he is, that he's scary enough that's like, right, we don't want to cross Corbell. So there's that. He's like, plus me, I'm the sheriff. I've been, like, reinstated like 4 times or something like that. So, like, yeah, I'm beloved too. So if we tell our story, you really think they're going to believe your story? Because, yes, your story, for one, is super unbelievable that you got sideswiped by an invisible car that I was driving and I stole your suspect from you. Or they're going to believe our story? Because, yes, it might be made up, but it's a lot more digestible. So it's like, because if you also do this, we'll get released. You, at worst, will, at the bare minimum, you lose your job. So it's like, yeah, so what are you going to do? Shut up and do what we tell you to do. And Tommy, like, beating himself up, calling himself a loser, because it's like, because in this situation, he has nothing to do, because it's like, hey, bring Burton and Flynn in, and it's like, he's in a tough spot because he knows, like, if he does that, it's like you're just playing into their games. Because it's also like, right, it's not even for their protection. It's most likely, like, I don't know whether it's going to be a situation of Corbell will kill them before Bob could. I mean, it makes you wonder in that situation, just hypothetically speaking, who would benefit, like, if, like, for whatever reason, Corbell did kill Burton and Flynn, what would that mean for Bob's situation? It's like, technically, he didn't finish the job, so would, the RI still go after his daughter? They got what they wanted in the end, so it doesn't really matter. I mean, they probably don't want to kill Flynn. They don't know, but we'll talk about that later. But once again, the bacteria that's on her brain is the data that Alita stole, so that won't do them any good. So, but once again, they're completely, at least that we're aware of, they are not. Only a small group knows about that, so I don't think the RI knows about it, because they sure as hell didn't know when she confronted Charisse the other episode, being like, "Yeah, I have no idea where that data is," assuming once again that Alita might still have it. So, well, like I said, we'll get to all that later. And Tommy, I was like, he was frustrated. I was like, well, Tommy, I was like, well, you do have that sonic punch. And he looks at the gun and the sonic punch. And I was like, all right, cool. And later on, he rolls up in and he's like, nah, we're going to have this story. That the fact is that, yes, that guy did come here and kill Mary. But you being the great officer that you are, never missing a beat, showed up trying to do the right thing. You and the gunman had a showdown. He saw you trying to draw your gun, and he emptied a clip into you. And he was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And Tommy did it. Because Tommy snapped. It's like, right, to do some evil for some good. Especially because it's like, right, this is also about protecting the people he cares about. It's like, right, because he's always had a soft spot for the Fishers, especially when it comes to Flynn and everything she's mixed up in, knowing that his boss is a part of this and that Corbell and them like have some connection of what's going on around the Fishers. So it's like, yeah, he has extra motivation of like, I need to take this guy down. I need to do this. So doing a little wrong for some good. I mean, it's gonna mess Tommy up because Tommy's always been the guy he's always been the good guy. So crossing the line like this. So Corbell's like, hey, let's keep calmer heads. You know, you need to be calm right now because you're also out of bullets thinking you're going to do this. I was like, yeah, but he also has a backup you weren't aware of. So he was able to get the sonic fist thing off first. I would double tap him because Corbell's super not dead because we've seen like, yes, that thing can do a lot of internal damage from just one punch, but especially if you use it at close proximity, like it was farther enough away that the sonic punch will probably like knock him unconscious. He's not dead. He didn't even like, cause even his head, like there was no blood from his head. So it's not like his head hit the steps or whatever where he ended up landing. It's like, no, he's not unconscious, but he's not dead. He might be like, some of his organs might be rearranged, but he's sure as hell not dead. So that's going to come back to bite Tommy if you don't come over and double tap. I mean, I'll be surprised if it turns out that Corbell's dead, because that'll put Jasper in a very interesting situation. But it's like Corbell knowing it was Tommy, like I know he has to get up and remember like, oh, Tommy's the one that did this to me, and maybe he sends, because he can't do it, he sends his nephew Jasper after Tommy, and that turns into a whole issue, or maybe he sends Jasper after Flynn and them. I have no idea, but it's like, because I don't know which one I don't know if Tommy's his only deputy. Because I was about to say, like, not unless the job now falls to Tommy. I don't know. Obviously, like, everything in this stub is going haywire because nothing's what it's supposed to be in the original timeline. Maybe that's in some aspects it's a good thing, in other aspects it's not a good thing at all. Because let's really quickly pivot over to everything with Low Beer and her discussions with it's Flynn, Connor, Burton, and Wilf. So they end up having their conversation. And I love that basically Burton and Connor have to go through a training situation, and Beatrix is leading them up before. It's almost like a raid situation. It's like, yeah, you got to get to the top. We're going to have some battles, and the numbers increase. Either way, that was kind of a pretty dope sequence, and it's like, oh, and you could tell they're having a time in their life, especially Connor, because he hasn't been able to do this for quite a while, as I'm then feeling himself, and they get to the top, and the surprise is that, yeah, there can only be one at the top, so both of them work together to try to go up against Beatrix, but she whoops their ass, because they're like, yo, what's your circumstances? And she's like, I'm special. That's all she kind of put it as, which I'll get to her circumstances in a second, but I love that Connor was like, man, you are fucking amazing, lady. She kicks him off the roof and knocks him off the roof, and he's falling to his death, and he's smiling. He's like, yeah, he's having the time of his life. She's just like, I'm gonna marry that woman. And they're like, who? He's like, the robot lady. I was like, that boy is smitten. But also, it seems like Beatrix is too, because it's like, oh yeah, like running through the data of it, Low Beer's like, okay, so how does that? It's like, well, Burton's the more predictable, dependable one, and Connor, I think he's the one I would turn to. And then Low Beer was like, why is that? And she's like, Honestly, I don't have the specific data to suggest why I said that, man. I was like, and Lowbeer probably didn't know what to really think of that. But then Beatrice kind of turns back to the screen a little bit, and you see her smile. I was like, she's smitten too. I was like, that's actually really sweet. There's something about Connor that she really liked. I think there's something, But we find out later on she's a peripheral, an autopiloted peripheral. And it seems like Lowbeer has apparently you're not supposed there are laws in place that peripheral isn't allowed to have full autonomy like Beatrix does, but it's not Beatrice, because it's the way things are. But Lowbeer, I guess, has very specific circumstances that it's there's exceptions to the rule. And it turns out, without really getting into, it seems like Charisse kind of figured right, if under circumstances like this, it has to be very specific, designed for this peripheral, and confirms that, without confirming it, but still confirming that it's based on Lowbeer's daughter that she lost. And she makes Beatrice power down and erase the past 5 minutes of this conversation. It's and she does. So I'm interesting. It's why not let her know the truth, And Lowbeer's it would complicate our relationship, because they have this very neat dynamic and flow. And for her, it's if she finds out that she's my daughter, it will complicate things, because it's right. So I'm supposed to be because Beatrice will see I'm supposed to be the replacement for the daughter that you lost. It's yes, she's a peripheral, but she does kind of have a thing of her own going on, So I think it's just right. I think she kind of wants Beatrice to be her own person while also still kind of being her daughter without her realizing she's being her daughter. So it's a very, very complicated situation. But obviously you have Lowbeer. Well, I skipped over a little bit, but I did like the conversation Lowbeer had with I'm going to jump to the one she had with Flynn and then circle back to the one that she had with Charisse. But with Flynn, she because they have access to stuff that isn't generally known, there's stuff that Wilf couldn't give her answers to. I was wondering, did Wilf actually not know, or did he know and he just refused to tell her? It seems like even with a cleft on his side, he still didn't have access to it. So we find out the differences. Connor didn't originally end up in his situation in the original timeline, which we saw that they altered that. Which make, because if I remember correctly, that section with Alita and Grace, that was a year ago, right? So it's right. So obviously for Lowbeer, it's so that means the Research Institute, at bare minimum, they've been at this for a decade, making changes. In fact, even saying that in Flynn's timeline, the jackpot is happening at an accelerated rate. Once again, her stub, any stub, but it seems like this is the way they're talking about it, seems like this is the only stub, the only timeline they have access to currently. So I guess they're going to do whatever they want to in this one, let it run its course, and then see how things end up. Because it's just like testing on, it's right, instead of, I was about to say instead of animals, but it's we are mammals and we are animals in our own right. So it's it's literally the same thing. It's this stub is the petri dish, and they're trying to see, how does this work? How does this affect them? Ooh, poke and prod the timeline and doing whatever they want to and taking advantage of it. They'll probably wait till the stub implodes or ends up at the same point that their timeline has. And then it's because obviously they're interacting with 2032, but they have to, I'm curious, when it comes to the stub, they have to have access to the future. So what does the future of that timeline look like? Because we haven't really dabbled in that, because we're focusing on their everything from 2032 before. So obviously, considering we now know that the jackpot is happening at a much faster rate in that timeline. In fact, it's been accelerated. I guess that's the RI's thing. I don't know whether that's them trying to discover I don't know. Everyone has their reasons for the benefits to this research, the stubs and all that. So, like I said, maybe they'll wait for that timeline to implode before they move on to a new stub. Can they only have access to one stub at a time? Or do they have access to multiple stubs? I have no idea. It doesn't seem like it, but because they say stubs, but they only seems like we have this one. But maybe it's only this one is what we're focusing on for now. I don't know. Either way. Some other interesting developments, though, is Connor survived, came out unscathed. Burton died in that original timeline. Okay, so that sucks. Then Flynn finds out, hey, I get married and I have 2 children with Tommy, which is like, oh, that's really sweet. It's like, oh, which is kind of crazy. It's like, yeah, that like Flynn always had a thing for him. It's like, yeah, it was always, to some extent, it was meant to be. It just things played out differently. I wonder, did after losing her brother, it made her maybe losing Burton kind of like made her decide, like, you know what, I'm gonna take this chance, and maybe that made her a little more brave in that situation, you know, because it's like, right, I lost my brother, got to live life to the fullest, and maybe that's why her and Tommy got together. Maybe that, I feel, because that's one personal thing in her life that's very different in the original timeline versus the timeline, the stub she's from. So I'd assume Burton's the kind of key factor in that, his death. She also had, well, again, she had 2 children, which I thought was, I like stuff like that, because it'd be like me having 3 children because I am one of 3 siblings. I mean, I'm one of, you know, I have 2 older sisters, is what I'm trying to say. So it'd be kind of like, yeah, me having 3 kids. I thought that was kind of interesting. It's like, I never even thought about it, but one of my sisters ended up that way. It's like, yeah, she has 3 daughters, so it's like, yeah. It'd be neat if Flynn ended up having a boy and girl, but, you know, to make it even more symmetrical, sorry. Either way. But it's like, yeah. So beyond that Flynn no longer exists, and obviously, so it's like, yeah, but you, for Lowbeer, it's like, you were so interesting. So she's asking her questions like, well, what do you fear? If I could disconnect this, disconnect you from this stub right now, would you want me to? And she was like, no. And he's like, well, why? And in that moment, she kind of froze, and it's like, oh. He said, like, oh, it's understandable why you froze, because the whole point is to, you know, answer without thinking. Because like, her greatest fear was like her mom, or it's her greatest strength, and her greatest strength is her unwillingness to give up. Your greatest weakness, my unwillingness to give up. So, but I think there's a multitude of stuff. It's everything with Wilf and, but also just like this grand adventure and this life. I mean, the future's given her a lot. I mean, it gave her mom's health back, which that's a whole thing we'll get to later on. But yeah. So for her, that's what, so that's all pretty significant. So she has ample reason, but she did ask Lowbeer, like, what is your greatest fear? And for her, it's the past. And ended up asking her, like, ultimately, like, do you actually have the power to sever my connection to this timeline and everything? And Lowbeer never actually gave her an actual, well, all she said is like, oh, I guess I overpromised, and kind of walked away. But it's like, oh, I think we'll probably obviously meet again under different circumstances. Like, you'll have been through some fights by then or something like that. So that's definitely going to be interesting. And obviously, like, Flynn is still a little bit of an enigma to Lowbeer, but she's like very fascinated in her. So that's going to be interesting. But anyway, Charisse ends up talking to Lowbeer. Let's jump into their conversation, where it's like, hey, okay, so basically, Alita stole some data. The data's about that mechanism in people. It's like, oh, you don't want that kind of out there to the general public. It's like, yeah, because that is hackable and everything. But also just talking about the devastation and the power of, like, right, you wouldn't want a klept like Lev or anyone like that to have access to it. So the Lowbeer, as well as the Mets in general, have wiped, like, she uses some very specific example of, like, yeah, you wiped them off the face of the earth. And Lowbeer is like, those are different circumstances. She's like, is it really? Because she's talking about that situation where it's like, yes, this ain't a scalpel situation. This is a full-blown come-in hammering type of situation. She's like, right, I want back what's mine. So she wants Flynn dead. I mean, it's like, well, because you've already gone for the hired help thing twice in the stub. That hasn't worked out. So it's like, right, why not go through more official channels? Because the whole thing is supposed to be this equilibrium between the Research Institute and the Mets and, like, the Kleps or the Neoprims. Like, that's all supposed to be some, like, very, like, God, what's the word I'm looking for? There is supposed to be like an ecosystem to it. There is a checks and balances, and that balance is swaying, at least from Charisse's perspective. So it's like, hey, I need you to do this for me. Even saying, like, you are smart and can see the grand picture enough to know that you need to side with me on this. So And even her saying like, oh, like we should meet at my lair next time. I'll have tea. I was like, ooh, you don't want none of that tea. Last time we saw you with tea, led to Grace's murder by bees. So I was like, yeah, I hope Lowbeard doesn't find herself in that situation. I don't trust you with tea anymore, my dear. So, but it's a lot for Lowbeard to kind of consider. Like, I don't think she's too keen on the thought of killing Flynn and them. It almost sounded like the way she was like, oh, an interview and stuff like that. I guess it was just to learn more about her. But I was like, at first I was like, is she trying to invite Flynn to be a join the Metropolitan Police or something, become like an inspector like her? That's what I was curious about, you know? But obviously, like, they were also looking into Connor and Burton too, so I don't know if they're going to be eventually brought into the fold to join as well. I have no idea. We'll ultimately have to wait to see where that was going. But I mean, maybe the interview, because she was like, oh, have you ever had an interview before, job interview? Just like, right, so I can question you and stuff like that. It's probably the main focus of it. But I initially was like, is she offering you a job? We'll see if that does turn into anything, or maybe it just simply was just a questioning aspect of it. Either way. So there's that element to it. Then there's the Ossian and Ash of it all, which they are discussing what to do about the Flynn thing. They are currently the only ones who know about the what was it? Yes, the bacteria on Flynn's brain. Well, initially they were, until Lev is like, oh, you thought that little language of yours was indecipherable? He's like, no, like anything, any code can be broken. So I don't know, so he broke through it. So he knows that they're scheming. He just didn't know what exactly. So threatening, he's like, I love the whole thing. He's like, right, I do like you, Ash. Ossian and I can take him or leave him, but it's like, you're very much like a klep. So it's like, what's this all about? And it's like, all right. And explaining where things kind of went wrong. Alita's plan, because she thought she was working with Burton. That's the problem with Flynn being the one that took over for Burton, was that she believed that Burton was the one that she was working with. So the point was for the data to transfer into his haptic. The whole point is like, yeah, it's in a stub. How are you going to find data, not only in the past, but a different timeline altogether? So there's that. But the problem is, Flynn doesn't have a doesn't have a haptic, so it went to her brain instead. So it's like, cool. And it's like, well, what was your plan? It's like, well, we're going to sell it the highest bidder. It's like, no, tell me the truth. We were going to sell it to the Neoprimps. And I just love Lev's reaction. Oh, why the fuck were you going to do that? It's like, because we wanted the Neoprimps to basically burn this world to the ground and build something new up. And he's like, right. He's like, don't betray me again. But I do like it, the ambition. So it's like, cool, let's figure this out together. So we're all on the same page now. Obviously, this trio, and once again, they're the only ones who currently know. Once again, not Liz Charisse is keeping those cards super close to the chest, but the fact is, when she interacted with Flynn, like, 2 episodes ago, that would have been something that you feel like would have gotten brought up. So it's like, it's got to be a situation of, no, like, she super is in the dark about it. So it seems like this trio is the only one who knows the truth about that. I mean, well, we know Dee Dee knows about the bacteria there, but obviously none of them in the past in the stub are going to correlate that to the data that Alita stole. The only person who's going to know that is Alita. Well, I don't even know if she knows that it's in Flynn, because she's still thinking it's in Burton. So, I don't know. She probably doesn't even know about the Flynn of it all. Maybe not yet, but maybe in the future. So we do have that. And finally, there's the whole situation with Bob. Because sadly, Burton and Flynn's mom, her condition went bad. At the very least, she lost her sight. So Reese took her to the hospital, Dee Dee to check her out. Sadly, Reese got killed in the onslaught. But I mean, hey, Reese went down fighting, like, got stabbed multiple times, so still giving Bob the hands, giving him the word. To be fair, I guess it was like Bob is a little, like, obviously he's on the older side, plus he's probably worn out from the car crash and everything. He's still probably a little banged up from that. So now it's a situation of like, right. Luckily, they immediately knew something was wrong from the text messages that Bob was sending. So they knew they were walking into a trap. So they were getting everything set up. It's like, cool. They saw the heat signatures, but they didn't know which one was which. So it's like, it's most likely the one to the far right, but it's like, well, we can't be for sure. So it's like, right, have Leon connect to Reese's body. It's like, yeah, but he'll feel that. And it's like, yeah, but any one of us would, like, Reese would do that for us if the situation were different. So it's like, right, basically use the haptic to move Reese's body, like, kind of like jolted a little bit so that Bob still thinks that Reese is alive and he'll catch him off guard and get him moving. So there's that. But two, I do love that it's like, why are you doing this? He's like, right, my daughter's at it's like, right, so to save your daughter, Bob, you're gonna have to kill my children. He's like, yeah, those are the only options. And for her, it's like, yeah, but you're living in this either or. And I was wondering where she was gonna go with that. And he was like, oh, so what is the other option? And she's like, there is a third option. You can die. And it's like, oh, she's like, yeah, but it's a viable option, but you're too cowardly to take it. He was like, oh, I mean, it's like, yeah, you could remove yourself from the equation. It's like, well, that's a good way to protect your daughter. But, once again, you're kind of selfish enough to be like, no, I want to live. I'm going to do this. I'm going to live. And yeah, my daughter's going to be fine. It's like, I get to be around for my daughter. It's like, yeah, sadly, that's not the case. But I think because the moment Reese's body moved, their mom smiled because she knew what was what. It's like, the thing is, you picked the wrong mother to fuck with. And Burton took the shot, went in there, and said, lights out, motherfucker. Pop, pop. So, yeah, that was the third option. And, looks like we took that third option, Bob. So that's definitely interesting. Once again, in conjunction with everything with Corbell, but I still say Corbell's not dead. I wish Tommy would go over there, double tap him with the sonic gun and just, like, get super in there, bam, bam, like, once, twice, to the gut, to the skull. I don't care what you do. Like, you should put Corbell down because he will be an issue for you and the Fisher. So, complicated situation to find themselves in, especially now that that all went down in front of Dee Dee, and she was trying to call Tommy, which Tommy was dealing with all of this. So, once again, they're without a sheriff right now, too. So it's like, whether that falls on Tommy now. I mean, he's supposed to be on leave, but he'll probably bring himself back to be like, yeah, I'm taking over as sheriff because he's going to try and lead the department in the right direction now. So a lot of really, really, really interesting stuff went down this episode. I'm excited to see where everything ends up taking us going forward. I looked it up to confirm it, but I do believe the next episode is the season finale. Prime Video typically leans more in the 8-episode direction anyway, but I just had to make sure. So I looked on IMDb. There's only 8 episodes listed. That does sometimes change depending on the show, but for now it seems like it's only 8 episodes. So I get the feeling like next episode is going to be the season finale. So I'm very, very excited to see where the next episode takes us, how the season ultimately ends up wrapping up. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.